This is If Then from Stanford Graduate School of Business, where we sit down with faculty and explore how their research deepens our understanding of business and leadership. I'm your host, Kevin Kuhl.
And I'm Michael McDowell, a producer here at the GSB. Kevin, we have another fascinating AI conversation today.
Fascinating is the right word, and what's particularly fascinating about this one is that we're talking about what AI can't do and may never be able to do.
And that's something we don't hear very often. So you spoke with Douglas Guilbeault, an assistant professor of organizational behavior here at the GSB. And I have to say, as an admitted non-expert, it feels like Doug is really onto something.
Yeah, I agree. He is. What he's done essentially is look at how AI learns in comparison to how humans learn. And what he discovers is, and what I find particularly interesting, is that human cognition is more complex than simply doing big calculations to arrive at answers, what he would describe as a sort of, quote, brute force, unquote, approach.
It isn't as if Doug is saying that this technology isn't incredibly, phenomenally impressive. It's just he's saying, so are we.
Exactly. So are we.
And I think that's a great place to leave it. So without further ado, Kevin, let's go right to your conversation with Doug Guilbeault.
You have a new paper out, and the title of it is A Simple Threshold Captures the Social Learning of Conventions, which, spoiler alert for our listeners, doesn't say anything about AI, but a lot of what we talk about today has big, big implications potentially for AI development and its applications. Before we get into all of that, though, I just wanted to sort of set the frame for the conversation here a little bit and ask you, why is understanding how humans learn essential for AI development, or is that even the right question?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I would start by saying that it's not simply that learning how humans learn unlocks a fundamental understanding about learning in general. It's that humans seem to learn through particularly special and puzzling ways. What seems to characterize human learning, both individually and socially, is we manage to achieve a lot, an enormous amount, from surprisingly little. And so what I mean by that is we are confronted with so many constraints. We have a body of a very particular kind. Our brain is really powerful, elegant machine, but it has all kinds of quirks, it's all kinds of limitations. Like
you were describing me individually. Doug. Thank you.
So things like limitations of memory, limitations of attention. We can communicate really well, but we have to do it with a particular kind of vocal system, you name it. Like whatever you look at in the human experience, there are constraints, but consistently we manage to punch well above our weight in terms of our ability to understand things of pretty robust, insightful, even potentially even universal or infinite scale. And if you think about our achievements in mathematics and quantum physics, let alone like the complexity of the world that we've built in current technologies, right? And so the puzzle of human learning is actually an age-old puzzle of, it's not quite how does something come from nothing, but it has that flavor, which is like, how does so much emerge from surprisingly little? And the reason why this is such a crux puzzle for AI is the current AI approach is the exact opposite strategy. So we're actually at present doing, when I say surprisingly little, I mean in comparison to everything that humans can do. Of course, AI is increasingly able to do quite a lot, but it's a direct function of so much computing power, so much engineering, and so much data. So by contrast, it seems humans manage to do so much with surprisingly little, with all these constraints, whereas AI is, by comparison, doing relatively little, but with so much power, so much compute, so many resources, and by comparison, relatively fewer constraints.
So I'm gonna read a little bit from the paper,
Yeah.
and then have you respond, and I hope that will sort of frame it and
Absolutely.
take us down that lane. Optimization-based models, which you've been talking about, optimization-based models of human behavior may overlook some of the simple categorical processes that characterize human social learning as satisficing. Now, when I encountered that word, I'd never heard that word before. Just first of all, just quickly tell us, what is satisficing?
Yeah, so arguably one of the founders of the field of organizational behavior is Nobel Prize winning Herb Simon. And he's famous for this book, Organizations. And satisficing was this idea that he had this sense that if you really take seriously the limitations that people face individually, like they actually can't gather all the information. Most of the time they have pretty limited information. They're lazy, they're tired, or they're multitasking. And they have to make decisions under time pressure with limited information. Satisficing is basically his term for people really pursue like satisfactory models or beliefs. So they wait until something's good enough.
Good enough.
And then they proceed. And so satisficing was basically that idea that you've reached a satisfactory model. But his point was it's not even that they necessarily realize that they're making a compromise and they're satisficing. It's like, that's just how we roll. We're just getting basically vague but effective enough approximations, and then just adapting in real time.
We're somehow making a calculation about what that sort of point is. But that's a good proxy for, I think, describing what that means. So let me just go on here. Despite their many achievements, the accelerating embrace of AI methodologies and LLMs specifically as a framework for simulating human learning is likely to maintain this blind spot, since such models are prevailingly designed to emulate human behavior through a brute force, statistically optimized approach, which again, you've talked about. So what is this blind spot?
Yeah. So in contrast to what we were saying before about humans having very limited data and just having to roll with these flexible adaptive concepts, LLMs do exactly the opposite. So if you think about the core logic of an LLM, it's based on the following problem, which is I have a sentence like, I grabbed the leash to walk my blank, and it would remove a word like dog and then try to predict what word is most likely to fill that slot.
Right.
How does it do that? It looks at every sentence ever created on the internet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. It has this high set of hypotheses where the hypotheses are all the possible words that could go into that slot. Now, humans say, oh, well, it's obviously dog. But we're in a world where like we take for granted that we have intuitions and familiarity and experience. The AI model starts without any of that. And that, I mean, in some ways, that's what makes them fascinating, right? But they're pitched as like they learn it all from the data.
Yeah.
That's why you need data centers basically the size of like Austin, Texas, because it's cranking through every possible combination of word based on like which words have shown up with each other, all the different sentences, all of these different data sets, just to complete that one prediction problem. No human has encountered a fraction of that amount of data to the point where you could argue that they must be learning these tasks through just a fundamentally different approach.
Yeah.
Because it's not realistic to say, oh, therefore they must be doing some next order problem of optimization where somehow they manage to go way beyond the current data, because the statistics don't add up. It doesn't add up how you could possibly fill that slot. The premise is they must just be adopting a qualitatively different kind of approach, one that we honestly don't have a full theory for. And as a side note, this is sort of where I'm coming from, is like, we're still very early days in cognitive science. Like, it's barely integrated with neurobiology, let alone like understanding cultural evolution and all the like ways that technology influences our behavior. There's so many fascinating open questions. But that's precisely why we're not in a position to say, oh, LLMs or AI are solving problems or doing things the way that humans do or in a way that's even comparable to humans, let alone that they're in a position to replace humans.
Sure.
So that's sort of the deeper set of problems.
And so what are the implications of that in your mind? What does that suggest going forward? And as a sort of additional question to that, who do you think needs to know these insights and who you're trying to influence with them?
Yeah. So I'm trying to speak to every person who is trying to understand their place and their purpose in the age of AI. And what I see pervasively is a sense of disempowerment and fear as these companies and a lot of the AI researchers continue en masse to put out this grandiose narrative that we're on the verge of creating a super intelligence, that we're going to automate all this cognitive work that humans do. Like maybe, and I'm not making this up, you'll have people say things like in 5 or 10 years, we won't need human scientists because AI can do all the science.
They're essentially replaceable by AI, yeah.
Right. And it goes even a step further, which is you have AI companies. Just the other day, I saw an advertisement in San Francisco from an AI startup where the tagline just said, predict anything. So they're in a world where they're putting an enormous amount of stock in their very particular approach to learning and saying it's not just that they'll be able to learn as well as humans and better, but they're going to be able to learn all the social world and its complexity and then have, think of all the control possibilities, all the influence possibilities. People see this narrative and they're rightly concerned and afraid. Like,
sure.
Are humans going to become obsolete? And to me, we're in absolutely no position to conclude any of that. If anything, what I hope through this research and this broader set of perspectives is, in some ways, humans are just an absolutely magnificent form of intelligence because somehow we've managed under all these remarkable constraints to figure out profound things about this universe. Think about like the nature of infinity or quantum physics. And this is something I don't think people fully appreciate is like the achievement that goes into something like quantum physics, where we can predict the movement of particles to like 0.0000000000001 precision. We have clearly developed a pretty serious level of understanding about this universe. All the mathematical paradoxes that we've understood, all of the incredible feats of brilliance in the arts and the expression and culture. And the question I'm asking myself is, why are people so ready to shortchange the human brilliance? And let alone the fact that we've only had science and engineering for basically, to cast a broad stroke, 200 years, whatever. There was another ad I saw in San Francisco from a startup company which said humanity has had a good run.
Wow.
So putting aside the very, very legit ethical question of why would that be your public-facing message.
Right. And why would you want to state that if you're trying to attract investors or adopters or whatever?
Yeah. It's like trying to invite them to a run of the lemmings off the cliff, Like, come on, everyone's doing it. But I say this, I present this to my students here, the MBAs, and I basically say, like, I show them the picture of the ad, and I say, like, we can all agree this is bad vibes, right? Yeah. And they all laugh, but then I say to them, yeah, but we also have to figure out how to respond to this, because it's growing. It's a way of thinking. And one of the things I think that gets it off the ground is this perspective that humans are just these prediction machines. We're just, at some level under the hood, just crunching numbers. And of course a machine's going to be better at that.
Right.
And if that's how you think about intelligence, you're not only drastically misrepresenting all of the complexities and all these radically different capabilities that humans have. If you compress it all into it's all just prediction and number crunching at the end of the day, then you're not setting yourself up to be able to motivate or defend your relevance.
Yeah, if AI were, a personality, you could say, if only I could do what humans do. Right? After the break, we'll talk about why Doug believes what's going on in our heads is fundamentally different from the way AI works, and why that matters. I'm going to poke at some things to see if I can get to a really clear understanding here. So clearly there's some sort of nuanced process that's going on in the human brain that AI so far has not achieved. Are we talking about some amalgam of intuition and experience? Can you tease this apart for me? What is it that we're really sort of suggesting that might be different in the human brain than what an AI could produce?
Yeah, this is, again, another wonderful question. I'll start by saying a word like intuition, I think it generally resonates that people have a sense of what that means. There's a lot of frustration or criticism with that term as a technical term scientifically. That leads a lot of people to dismiss it. I tend to be of the side where I actually don't dismiss it. I agree that it's not exactly clear, but the reason why I don't dismiss it is there's just so many accounts of like famous mathematicians or scientists and artists who like in their own biography like put a lot of stock in something like intuition.
The aha moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I like about it, even though we still don't understand it, is there's a way in which it involves a kind of leaping, like an epiphany, where it's not a gradual step from what you've been thinking or what you're familiar with. It's like you fundamentally are struck by a new way of thinking about something. And to the extent that it evokes something like a leap of inference or insight, I actually think that is deeply, deeply characteristic of human learning. And I actually think what we find in this paper could be construed as a kind of conceptual leaping. And there are very real debates happening in the AI world right now that the current large language model architectures are not capable of doing that, because they have to move step by step in a smooth, they would say continuous way, where you have to be within some sort of space that they've understood. So in terms of what makes that possible, one inkling that has some evidence is humans don't just think statistically. There's actually a number of kind of counterintuitive mechanisms that humans reason through. One is we use a lot of metaphors and analogies. We are able to develop, for lack of a better word, like feelings towards ideas. So, in current language, we would say like vibes or these sorts of things. But there is a reality to that. There is a sense, like an aesthetic sense that like, and I experience in my own work, I know lots of people who experience it, where you just kind of know something's a good idea. You don't exactly know, you can't even put it, there's an ineffability to it.
Yes, I think everyone can relate to that, right? You sort of know it when you see it, sort of thing.
Yeah, and one of my favorite examples, because it is like there are mathematicians where they will have an intuition that either a problem is solvable or there's a particular way to solve a problem, and it will take them 10 years, and they will fail and fail again and again and again. And people around them will tell them that they're crazy, that it won't work. At that point, you would characterize their behavior as irrational. But then we know, I mean, some of them, they end up failing, and we don't hear about those cases. But then some of the time, they end up succeeding, and it's a major breakthrough. And what was it that they held on to? Some intuition, some sense that this was the right direction, despite all odds. And that's something that I think is really profound and fascinating about human learning, that we really are nowhere close to understanding fundamentally now. And it does not at all fall out of the current statistical framework. If anything, they just kind of sidestep it or are not even conversant with that being as foundational of a problem as it is.
Yeah. If you were going to describe this paper or this research in a way that would tell us what kind of the foundational thing is that you're seeking to answer here, what is that?
Yeah, so on that theme of how humans manage to do a lot with a little, the specific puzzles and mysteries that lie in that is like the stuff that falls in that little camp, like what are the components, what are the basic principles, the regularities. We found a simple mathematical regularity, a rule-like pattern that appears to characterize everything from how children learn grammatical rules, how they learn simple mathematical rules. We've shown that the same regularity also characterizes how humans learn behavioral patterns, possibly quite a wide range of behaviors, everything from what style of clothing, like formality or informality, is appropriate to wear at work. What are the greetings that people say? What are the topics of conversations that are appropriate or inappropriate in particular contexts? And then we've also generalized it even to just how we make inferences about what's going on in each other's heads, like what we're actually thinking or feeling or believing in particular interactions.
Yeah.
And so we're excited about the possibility of having something very simple that we can hold on to understand all these different phenomena.
Yeah, this just sounds so interesting, and it's unlike, frankly, anything that I've heard before. So let me ask you this. There's been part of the conversation is sort of what is the ceiling for AI? What's the upper limit of what it can know or do? Do these findings suggest that there is an upper limit?
Well, it's a very good question because, so I will say, like, one of the things that we show in the paper, right, is like this optimization framework is very limited in predicting human behavior. And it's not in the paper, but we have results that we will be submitting for publication soon where we replicate LLMs in these experiments and they behave exactly what you would expect of the more optimizer approach. What does that mean? It means that if LLMs are learning human behavior through all these predictions, there might be a limit to which that approach can understand the underlying human nature, which is we're the creative leapers. Because what we see in the threshold paper is, and this might not come across to people reading it, is it's not just that, oh, there's this simple rule that people use that they learn, but that rule has this very unique property, which is in the early stages before that tolerance principle is reached, people's behavior is basically random. And then suddenly they converge to a stable categorical understanding. So they've leapt from a random state to an ordered state. There may be a fundamental limit in the ability for LLM to understand that kind of transitional behavior.
Right.
And that's actually something that humans seem to, there's a paper that came out in PNAS a year ago looking at when do mathematicians have their insights, and they're following their behavior at the board. And they show that right before they have an insight, their body actually becomes more erratic and random. Their eye gazes dart around, they become more chaotic and noisy. So, I mean, that's just a cute example, but there's so many ways in which humans actually seem to be able to harness randomness and inhabit disorder and incoherence and ineffability and chaos and somehow make meaning from that state. It's not clear to me that LLMs or any current approach to understanding AI is positioned to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, and I know I could go on, is, I think the party line from an AI hype person would be like, no, but that's what AIs do because we give them all this data and they just have to learn from the bottom up. But that's not what they're doing. You've given them highly structured data. You're not giving them order and chaos and ineffability and randomness.
Right.
You're giving them sentences which are in some ways perfectly designed to be learned from, because I can knock out a word and know for sure that a word's supposed to be there. And I know for sure that other language that I've seen in the world will help solve that problem. That's the kind of crutch, a learning crutch that humans fundamentally do not have. We did not have it in our evolution as a species. I mean, you could debate to what extent our biology has given us some of that, but suffice to say for this point that we actually have to solve a fundamentally different problem, which is you don't even know if there's regularity and order in the world at all. And actually you encounter a lot of noise, a lot of chaos, a lot of randomness. And we somehow figure how to make meaning and establish strong understandings from within that.
This is just absolutely fascinating because as you're talking, I'm thinking about all the various situations in one's life, even in one day, in which what you're describing is part of your quote unquote learning. What is lost, do you think, if we assume that everything is sort of a matter of optimization?
I'll end by saying something perhaps poetic, but I hope it's pregnant and gives the listeners a sense of all that this could possibly imply, which is, a driving force in the sense of awe and wonder that powers science and artists and spirituality is a sense that there's a fundamental strangeness. Things are so overwhelmingly complex and beautiful and chaotic. There's a strangeness, there's a weirdness to knowing and experiencing something like infinite potentials, having a sense of meaning. Like, Wittgenstein, my favorite philosopher, said, the mystery is not what exists, but that it exists. That this is. And we have some stable felt reality of that. What's lost is the fact that matters at a foundational level. There's a way in which this optimization approach is a mechanization approach. And what, people who come from a rational point of view, they want to be dismissive and say, no, I don't need to feel this strangeness or weirdness. I don't need to include that into my models because it's all a machine at the end of the day. Now, I'm not saying it's not mechanistic. I think there are ways in which these things work. But the mystery is I actually think when we end up developing an understanding of all these things, it will be in service of pointing out the strangeness. There's a weirdness to human nature. It's strange, it's quirky, it's idiosyncratic, it's creative and beautiful. And one of the things I would point to is look at biology. Biology is crazy. Look at all the different life forms, like the giraffe, the squid. That's the kind of system we are. We're not this orderly machine as much as society and the incentives and the forces that be might want that to be true.
Doug, I actually was riveted by this conversation. I hadn't heard a lot of this before. I hope this research gets transmitted and has some impact on how people are thinking about these things. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It's absolutely such a pleasure. And I hope we can, not just us, but I hope people continue this conversation forward. I think it's a really important conversation to be having.
Yeah, thanks. If Then is a podcast from Stanford Graduate School of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Kuhl. This episode was produced by Michael McDowell, editing and mixing by Will Stanton. Elizabeth Wylezik-Stern is our head of content and operations, and Kristen Harlan is captain of this ship. Additional production support from Jim Colgan, Whitney Legg, Tatiana Goldman, and H. Ash. For more on our faculty and their research, find Stanford GSB online at gsb.stanford.edu or on social media at Stanford GSB. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon.